Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Amakwariola. In Africa, where there seem to be never-ending demand for good governance, human rights are often strangled, civil society is regularly suppressed, and viable opposition is almost non-existent in nations where leadership is all about control. Ethiopia is a typical example where government has been able to keep a tight grip on the country in the last 25 years, not until a wave of protests began in parts of the country in November 2015. Security forces have had to use excessive force in most cases, with Human Rights Watch estimating that more than 400 people have been killed, thousands have been injured, and tens of thousands have been arrested amidst cases of enforced disappearance. So we ask, what are your thoughts on the culture of political repression in parts of Africa, going by recent developments in Ethiopia? You can join the conversation and, of course, share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC Connect. And here's a report to launch the program, and Africa Today will be right back.
It's been the most significant protest yet in Ethiopia's political development since the death of the country's longtime authoritarian leader, Meles Zenawi. During the weekend, hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets in more than 200 towns and cities across Amhara and Oromia regions, sparking global interest, especially on social media with the hashtag Oromia protests. Phone lines and internet access were blocked, while police fired tear gas and blocked roads to several towns across the regions. According to Hassan Hussein, an Oromia rights activist, it appeared hell broke loose. Report from Amnesty International says more than 100 people lost their lives as the security forces brutally suppressed the new wave of anti-government protests. Although there were no immediate factors that triggered the latest occurrences, the remote cause is due to an expansion of the capital into the Oromia regions, which the ethnic group believes would displace their farmers. While chanting anti-government slogans and waving dissident flags, both groups protested government and military domination by the Tigrayan ethnic group, which makes up only 6% of the population. Meanwhile, Amhara and Oromia had no formal relations prior to now, but both regions have shown strong solidarity for each other. Continued persecution and long-term marginalization by the government were included in their agitation amidst clamors for the freedom of their detained members. As an ally to the Ethiopian government, the United States has expressed deep concerns for the violence towards protesters, saying such opposition protests are constitutional and should be respected.
Welcome back. The opposition to the government of Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn recently took a new dimension, with protesters clamoring for political inclusion, fair distribution of resources, and the right to freedom of expression. The unconventional and innovative resistance to many years of iron-fisted rule is largely seen as the ruling party's biggest political challenge yet. Joining me on Africa Today in the studio, I have Sheyi Martins, a lawyer and a political analyst here in Nigeria. Thanks a lot for being a part of the program, sir.
You're welcome.
Well, Sheyi, what do you make of the wave of protests in Ethiopia and the way the government responded?
Well, most of these governments that are very suppressive are rather naive towards opposition, and they just enjoyed that aspect of tight fists that the people have been used to in the past couple of years, precisely almost 30 years gone. And the government of Haile Mariam saying people wanting to be free, expressive on inclusion, on how is it that you're making this smaller portion of the country all that is important to you in your government, that is putting up some sections of the nation over and above the others. So this has been happening for quite a while. And unfortunately, in that part of Africa, in the Horn of Africa, such repressive tendencies had continued to go on unabated. Countries like Eritrea experience is the same, and it is still ongoing. And there are several other countries in Africa, away from Africa, that are doing this and keeping opposition. Just the thought of freedom of expression for the people horrifies the government. The government cannot allow people to gather, independent assembly, for instance, and such things make them really jittery, as long as it is not coming from one of their own. What happened in Oromia was just a test of whether this government can really accommodate, after all these years, time for you to listen to us. And the government discovered that, well, these people had not been talking, so they must have been doing so online. And for all intent and purpose, we've known of countries or nations like China, trying to subdue the people by interfering with cyberspace. And this is what the government did in Ethiopia. For days, just canceled the internet, because there's only one internet provider in the country, and had to cancel that so that these people cannot even talk to themselves.
Have access.
They don't know access. And that is it. That was why they were able to go through all of what they did, with the Human Rights Watch is saying almost 400 people had been affected, died. The government is saying that is not correct, because how do they get access? They have done this, so they didn't expect anybody else will be able to take all of this information out to the open world. But we know since the time of Haile Mariam, the S.Y. Mengistu Haile Mariam, the people are used to repression. It's now that they're beginning to see that in this global world, time has come to start speaking out and let the world assist them, because there's no longer communism. There's no longer blockade here and there, where you have all this repressive tendency and governments to hold them back. So why shouldn't they join the free world?
So if they continue in this practice of, voicing out their concerns against what the government has been doing against their, beliefs, as it were, what do you think would be the likely implications, especially as the government is still trying to grapple with this new trend where the people decided to spring up and say, we do not support what you do to us?
Indeed, because United Nations has come in, the government is very likely to listen, because here is a government that enjoys the goodwill of the West, which is why they are where they are today, which is why things are moving in Ethiopia, because they get the support. That support is going to end. People around the world are beginning to see the repressive tendencies of such governments, and they're going to pressure the United Nations, the United States, that's been supporting Ethiopia for so long, and countries in Europe, particularly Italy, Germany, the European Union in particular, that are supporting Ethiopia and making things go further in Ethiopia, that has gotten Prime Minister Haile Mariam that grip that he thought he could use over his people. People will start pressuring over that. And since the United Nations has shown concern, the best way for him is to step down a little. We know that it's not very easy for most African countries. They just like to sit tight. And we know this is happening in, somebody used the name Primo of the president in Zimbabwe, for instance. Places like Burundi, in Rwanda, this kind of repressive tendencies are being noticed all over the world. And people will not stop. People like us will keep putting information on, because these people still get out, no matter which way possible.
Well, yeah, right. Before now, you mentioned that part of the reasons why part of the reasons behind this protest is the access to social media. So the people are able to speak up and speak out against what the government has been doing for the past few years. But aside from what you've mentioned, what else do you think is really behind this scale where the people decide to say we do not want to be kept silent, we can speak up and speak for ourselves?
Political paranoia, and that is why government uses psychological means to want to repress its people, because they do not want a viable opposition. For instance, ordinarily somebody saying he wants another term in Burundi, for instance, this was what caused the repression in that of political opponents in those countries. And there are several countries when you find government getting too comfortable and wanting to do something extraordinary, aside from the way the Constitution allows them to. They want to do things that are extra constitutional. That is when people stand up to say, no, you're not allowed to do so. And the only way they think they can go ahead is to exploit that position of keeping freedom of speech, no, freedom of association, get the people to stay away, and use the soldiers and the police, which is one of the things that most of this government uses to repress people.
All right, so let me quickly hold your thoughts. We need to go on this quick break. We've been looking at the culture of repression in Africa on the program. Stay with us here for more discussions after this. Welcome back. After economists significantly downgraded economic forecasts for Ethiopia last year, the exodus of people fleeing repression grew as droughts left millions of people dependent on food aid. Neighboring Eritrea has also been described as one of the biggest sources of migrants on the run to Europe, desperately trying to escape a dictatorship that sounds close to being Africa's equivalent of North Korea. We'll still have in the studio Mr. Sheyi Martins bringing his thoughts to bear on this issue. Mr. Sheyi, just before we went on break, you were giving me your thoughts on some of the reasons why the people decide, to speak up against repression. But aside from this now, about 100 people were killed during the demonstrations. How much of a concern do you think this should be for the African Union?
The African Union should be very, very concerned, because here is a situation where military regime is no longer tolerable. Repression of the opposition is being spoken out about. Most governments are now speaking about, oh, don't repress the opposition because it is needed for good governance. You need a viable opposition. But you see, these repressive governments cannot help but repress opposition. They don't like people talking. They don't take criticisms very well. And of course, when people try to criticize the government, they don't look at the other side of a criticism. Maybe these are things we should take on board for this country to move forward. Unfortunately, countries like Equatorial Guinea are guilty of this. We mentioned Eritrea. Eritrea is another North Korea in Africa, as it were. And Ethiopia is not too far from it. Why is this? The people, I hate to use the word lethargic.
What does that mean by that?
Indeed, they've suffered too long. They've suffered too long. Repressive government, iron-fisted government, way down from Mengistu Haile Mariam. And you know how long that took before they had this. And it took the kind of protest that is now coming to take Mengistu Haile Mariam completely out. And if that kind of protest seems to rear its head, obviously the government is going to be
unpopular.
Yeah. So they don't want that. So the best way to keep everybody sweet is to repress them.
And how long do you think they can keep
It's
up
not
with
going
that?
to be long, because the world is bigger a stage than they think it used to be. Unfortunately, the media is out there for everybody's usage. So these people will have access one way or the other. If they don't have access within Ethiopia, which is what the government did, took over the singular provider that there is in the nation, people from abroad, Ethiopians in England, Ethiopians all over the world, know what is going on. They start the message. They start posting the message, which is why United Nations cannot afford not to listen to the people of Horn of Africa, because that is the most troubled spot in Africa today when it comes to good governance. Yes, there are other areas, South Sudan, for instance. That one is another big problem for the world, for particularly African Union to grapple with. But there is a semblance of stability with talking to opposition, which everybody is beginning to encourage. Talk to your opposition, bring them in, let the guerrilla fighters join us, and let's start to move this nation forward. That is the way forward, and that is what everybody is trying to preach.
All right, in a situation where things go awry in Ethiopia? Well, you just mentioned earlier that the West, the support of the West might not, come in handy. But do you think the West might leave its ally unprotected in this case?
Unfortunately, it's not a case of leaving its ally unprotected, but it's a way of getting them to toe the line. They needed to toe the line. There was a time, we remember here, everybody was concerned about the drought in Ethiopia. We knew how that affected the whole world. The whole world was involved. And immediately the government was taken over, and there was another one that was much friendlier to Western countries, that Western countries can support. There was a lot of aid, there was a lot of support, a lot of engagement with the present government, which they had enjoyed for so many years. It's about time to start listening to other ethnic groups particularly, because the situation in Ethiopia is practically ethnic. It is ethnic. Some little minority who are the people, yes, in government at this time.
Rather, yeah.
Yes, the Tigray end of the country, the people there are the ones in government, and they want to be, yes, they want to hold on to that majority. And other groups are asking, what about us? Don't we belong to the same nation? Don't we have rights as well? So these are questions that people will have to take very seriously. And the African Union cannot dissuade itself from saying to a government like Ethiopia, about time you toe the line. After all, that's where the headquarters is, in Addis.
Indeed.
So why would they say they're not seeing what is happening in Addis Ababa?
So it's more of a test for the African Union.
It's more of a test for the African Union.
So what do you think they should do at this point?
It is very simple. Beg their brother. That's the best they can do right now. Beg their brother, please, about time you allow a sensible kind of governance so that the people can be involved. It is happening everywhere. Equatorial Guinea is experiencing the same as well. And it's just the talk Jojo. Instead of going to war, using the military and the police to repress and suppress your people, talk to them. And this is happening. The same thing we have seen, experienced, and had brought joy to Southern Sudan. Southern Sudan is some relative quietness. But believe me, if they continue this way, it's going to blossom well, because that is a country that is seriously clamoring for peace. Now, a semblance of peace is on ground, and there is a timetable of how we can get there, and they're beginning to work it out gradually.
Okay. Well, in countries where political repression persists, what do you think are the likely implications in the nearest future?
The world is a global village. No one can isolate itself. No nation can isolate itself at this present time. For the future, if you do it today, you're not likely to get away with it, because the courts will be waiting for you. And these are some of the issues that some of these governments don't take too seriously. Because about time they know that we're not going to keep quiet for too long. There is going to be a judgment day of some sort, because they will be held responsible for some of these extrajudicial murders. The killings that's been going on, somebody will have to take responsibility somehow. And someday, hey, it happened in Rwanda. It happened in South Africa. And someone must take responsibility for the death and the martyrs and those whose life had been sacrificed on the table of good governance. So these things will happen. So these people in government today may be enjoying the perks of being in office, but the day they're out, the law will find them.
Catch up with them.
Oh, it most certainly will catch up with them. So once they start reasoning along those lines, I think they will start, hopefully, start thinking about time to allow the opposition to talk and give them some semblance of, involvement in governance.
All right, looking at the international community, you mentioned the United Nations, having to be in the front of all these differences, if at all it is to have peace. What else do you think would be the role of the international community in the widest sense, so it doesn't seem like they are the ones causing more trouble in Africa?
It's all about lobbying. Lobbying United Nations. The United Nations does not have the teeth to even ask those people to stop. But it can't lobby. People can lobby. You go to the UN and you talk to them and you give them reasons and evidences and witnesses to see what is going on in these nations.
Yeah.
And you talk to brothers. Because United Nations is a brotherhood form of organization which includes every nation, and you sign on to what they're asking you to do. If you are a signatory to any of those treaties, oh, you're better. It's not that the United Nations will just unilaterally say we are going to put a sanction on a particular nation. No, it's all about lobby. The same for African Union, which is what, but of course the difference is there are some nations that are more powerful, who are more influential. Same for the UN. A country like the United States will influence members of the Security Council, for instance. No, we cannot allow this nation to go on with this. So those lobby is what comes from people power. The United Nations, well, it could be favorable to the United States for all you care, because this is election year. Because it's election year, they're going to do everything possible to say that, well, the wealth and the power of America that is keeping Ethiopia running, we have to stop it because of these despots. The same in other countries with interests. They have to come in to say, to be seen, to be doing something, that this is a free world. It's a democratic tendency, and that is what we're calling for. Let a free world open up and let the people have their say and their life of peace. Indeed. And justice.
A life of peace and justice it is, and it will be also for Africans in Africa.
That's what we've been calling for all along.
Thanks a lot, Seyi Martins, our political analyst, for bringing your thoughts to bear on the program. It's a pleasure.
Indeed. Thank you.
From Gambia to Zimbabwe, Burundi to Ethiopia, the culture of political repression remains that the essence of democracy is almost defeated, with the event of resistance largely inevitable. While the continuous triumph of the corrupt and utter submission of the deprived often make a mess of Africa's rebirth and transformation, ensuring that a tipping point is never too far away. That's our package for today, but don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC Connect, and also follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one again, I am Esther Makwariola, and always remember, this is Africa.